Welcome back to Hosting.com Labs, the series where we answer the questions you're actually typing into Google at weird hours of the night, like when you decided to perform some last minute updates or soft launch that new business. I'm Lindsey, and today we're talking about domain extensions. These are those bits at the end of a web address, the .com, the .org, the .net after your business name. The part most people either pick without thinking or spend way too long worrying about. Here's what I want you to take away from this video. Your TLD is a first impression, so you might as well make it count. It tells visitors at a glance something real about who you are and what you're here for. And with over 1,600 domain extensions available, yes, 1,600, the choice has never been bigger or more meaningful. So whether you're building something for the first time, rebranding, or just trying to figure out why everyone seems to be using .ai all of a sudden, then this episode is for you. We're going to cover the classic extensions, the ones doing serious work in 2026, take a deep dive into .org specifically, and a framework for making a choice without spending too much time on it. Let's go. Before we get into specific extensions, let's just make sure we're all on the same page about what we're actually talking about. A domain name has two main parts. There's the name itself, like hosting in hosting.com, even though our full brand name is hosting.com. But anyway, that's a story for later. And then there's the extension, which is everything after the dot. That extension is technically called a TLD, which stands for top level domain. You'll hear both terms. They mean the same thing. For most of the internet's early history, the choice was simple. You had a handful of options, .com, .net, .org, .edu, or .gov. That was pretty much it. Then in the early 2010s, something changed. The number of available extensions absolutely exploded. New TLDs came in covering industries, interests, locations, and professions. .tech, .store, .design, .academy. Suddenly the web had a real vocabulary. And that shift mattered. It gave the domain name real communicative power, as well giving people more options with their branding. A URL could now signal your industry, your audience, your purpose, and more right from the first glance. Which brings us to where we are now. People choose TLDs intentionally. Branding, SEO, and memorability have moved front and center in that decision. A domain name and its extension have become an integral part of a business's identity. So let's talk about what your options actually look like, starting with the classics. Whatever else changes in the domain world, 3 extensions have remained at the top of the pile since the beginning: .com, .net, and .org. Think of them as the OGs, the originals. They may not be the flashiest options in 2026, but they carry real authority and recognition. Let's take them one at a time. .com. .com started life as the extension for commercial websites. That's where the name comes from. But it long ago outgrew that original purpose. Today, .com is the default for pretty much everything, including blogs, stores, portfolios, nonprofits, tools, and communities. It's the extension people type automatically when they don't know what else to use. That is both its biggest strength and its only real weakness. On the upside, .com is immediately professional. It's memorable because it's what people expect, and it's one of the most affordable options out there, from around $12 to $20 per year, depending on your registrar. The downside? Saturation. Because .com is so popular, finding a short, clean, memorable name that isn't already taken can feel like searching for buried treasure. If your ideal .com is gone, you've got 2 choices. Get creative with the name or consider an alternative extension. Actually, before we move on from .com, I want to use it to make a point that applies to every extension we're about to cover. As I mentioned earlier, we're not just called hosting or hosting company or hosting hub. We're called hosting.com. The TLD isn't just tacked onto the end of the name for the sake of the website. It is actually part of the name. The dot is intentional. The .com is load-bearing. And that's a clever thing you can do with a domain. When a TLD becomes part of your brand name rather than just an address suffix, something interesting happens. Your URL becomes self-explanatory. Your brand and your web address are the same thing. There's nothing to remember separately. It's all one. And this works across extensions, not just .com. Think about this brand name, for example, cyber.tech. It doesn't just describe what the site does, the whole thing reads as a brand name. Tech.store does the same thing. The extension isn't an afterthought, it's doing half the naming work. This is actually one of the strongest arguments for exploring newer extensions, rather than defaulting straight to .com. Your ideal .com might be taken, but your ideal name with the well-chosen TLD this might be wide open, and it might make for a cleaner, more memorable brand than the .com version ever would have. A consultancy called Design.studio, podcast network called Loud.media, a training platform called Learn.academy. These are addresses and names that explain themselves all in one. So when you're choosing a domain, it's worth asking not just, is this available, but does this extension actually become part of how I want people to say and remember my name? That's the move hosting.com made. And with over 1,600 TLDs available across the web on all these different providers, the creative possibilities are pretty wide open. Now, back to our big three. .NET. .NET was originally built for network providers and tech infrastructure. Again, right there in the name. Like .com, it's evolved well beyond that original purpose and is now used across a wide range of businesses and projects. It carries genuine credibility, and most users recognize and trust it. The main thing worth knowing, it's often perceived as the runner-up to .com. If your ideal .com is taken and .net is available, it can be a solid choice, especially for tech-leaning businesses. Just know that it carries slightly less brand authority than its sibling. And then there's .org, the third pillar of the original TLD family, and perhaps the most interesting one to talk about. .org was created in the mid-1980s alongside .com, .net, .edu, and .gov. From the very beginning, it had a specific purpose: to provide a digital home for nonprofit organizations, charitable groups, scientific institutions, and advocacy communities. Where .com became synonymous with commerce, .org was built for something different: impact. Today, .org is managed by something called the Public Interest Registry, or PIR. Their job is to keep .org credible, trusted, and true to its roots. The criteria for using .org has evolved over time, but the core question remains the same. Is your primary purpose to serve a broader public interest? If yes, .org is your natural home. That includes nonprofits, foundations, educational institutions with a public focus, and community groups working for social, cultural, or charitable impact. What it's not for is a for-profit business, even well-intentioned ones, and personal blogs or passion projects without a clear organizational purpose. .org isn't really the right fit there either. The reason this matters is simple: trust. When someone sees a .org address, there's an immediate signal. This organization is here to do good, not to sell you something. That perception creates a real ripple effect. Visitors are more likely to engage, donate, volunteer, and share your content when they believe in your purpose, and the .org extension reinforces that belief from the very first glance. Does .org directly improve your search rankings? No domain extension gets you a ranking boost from Google's algorithm directly, but the trust and credibility of .org tends to generate higher engagement, lower bounce rates, and more backlinks from other sources. And all of those things do contribute to how your site performs in search over time. Some of the most impactful organizations on the web use .org, like World Wildlife Fund at worldwildlife.org, Doctors Without Borders, Khan Academy, the Metropolitan Museum of Art. The extension does real work for each of them. And from a practical standpoint, .org is still a relatively inexpensive domain. You can register one at hosting.com for $9.99 a year. All right, the classics have been covered. Now let's talk about the newer extensions that are genuinely making noise in 2026. Not because they're trendy, but because they're doing real branding and communication work for the businesses that use them. .co. First up, and no, that's not a typo for .com, it's its own thing entirely. .co originally started as the country-specific domain for Colombia. But like several other country code extensions, it found a second life. Today, it's used globally as a modern, sharp alternative to .com, and startups, creatives, and entrepreneurs in particular love it. The appeal is obvious. It's one character shorter, which sounds minor, but makes a real visual difference. And because the pool of registered .co names is much smaller than .coms, you're far more likely to find the name you actually want. The trade-off, worth knowing, .co tends to be pricier than .com, and some users still confuse it with .com on first glance. Worth factoring in, but for a lot of brands, the trade-off is completely worth it. .ai. Here's a fun piece of internet history. .ai has actually been around since the 1990s. It was created as the country-specific domain for Anguilla, a small sunny island territory in the Caribbean. Then artificial intelligence exploded in popularity over the last 5 years or so, and suddenly those two letters meant something very different to a very large audience. Tech companies and startups, including some you'd recognize like Claude.ai and Perplexity.ai, adopted it to signal innovation and cutting-edge technology, and the association stuck. Today, .ai instantly communicates that you're operating in the technology space for the right brand. It's punchy, memorable, and modern. The thing to keep in mind, it's on the pricier end of the scale. And if your audience isn't tech forward, the association might be less valuable. Also worth noting, if you're targeting a specific country's audience, a country code TLD for that region is often a better SEO move for local search, since Google treats country code domains as signals of local relevance. .tech. If .ai is the extension that evolved into a tech signal, then .tech is the one that was always designed to be exactly that. Whether you're building software, selling hardware, running an IT consultant, or developing something in a garage that doesn't quite have a name yet, .tech tells your visitors immediately where you're operating. No subtext required. It also opens up some genuinely creative naming possibilities. The example we love, cyber.tech. Memorable, on brand, and immediately tells you exactly what kind of site you're visiting. The main consideration, like most newer extensions, .tech costs a bit more than .com, but for a tech business, the brand clarity can absolutely justify it. .store, last of the main 7. .store, and this one is probably the most self-explanatory, is built for e-commerce. If you're selling physical products, digital goods, services, or running a drop shipping operation, .store puts that front and center in your URL. You're not just a website for browsing, you're a store for shopping. When combined with a strong product name, it can be extraordinarily clear. Tech.store is a good example, and it works precisely because it tells you exactly what you'll find there. Higher cost than .com, and it's a niche choice in the sense that it works best specifically for commerce sites. But for the right business, that clarity is a genuine asset. Beyond the main 7, there's a whole world of industry-specific extensions that can work really well if they match your business. Let me run through some quick highlights. .io, originally the country domain for the British Indian Ocean Territory, it got fully adopted by the tech world because I/O means input-output in computing. Developers love this one. .app, exactly what it sounds like. If you build applications, .app tells the world what you do before they've read your site name. .design, for graphic designers, UX, UI designers, interior designers, this extension communicates your work cleanly and professionally. Stands out on a business card. .law. If you're running a law firm or an independent legal practice, .law is professional, credible, and industry specific in a way that .com can't really compete with. .media. Podcasts, digital publications, production companies. .media ties your domain directly to your work in a way that feels intentional. .health. For health-related services and businesses, .health signals your focus clearly. If you're running a practice, you can use .clinic, because that's worth checking out too. .academy. For online courses, tutoring services, or any educational platform, think of this one as the accessible alternative to the very restrictive .edu extension. .shop. Used globally in the same way .store is used, to instantly specify that the site is an e-commerce website. And there are a few extensions we're steering clear of, at least for most businesses' use cases. Some TLDs like .global, .finance, .marketing, and .expert can be slightly out of budget for smaller businesses, especially compared with other TLDs, for what you actually get. Generic appeal usually doesn't justify the cost. Others like .international, .accounting, .solutions, and .community have a memorability problem. They're long, harder to type and spell, and can feel more confusing than clear. And then there's a handful that have a trust problem. .top, .click, and .review have all been associated with spam and low trust sites. That doesn't mean every site using them is malicious, but it can raise red flags with users and spam filters. Definitely worth knowing before you register. All right, you know what the options are. Now, how do you actually decide? 3 questions. That's all you need to answer. Question 1, does it fit your industry? Your extension should feel like a natural match for what you do. If you're a tech company, .tech or .io makes sense. If you're a nonprofit, .org is almost always the right call. If you're running an online store, .store does immediate communicative work. Industry fit narrows your options fast, and it makes your domain more memorable to the right audience. Question 2, is it trustworthy? Some extensions carry weight, and some don't. Go with an extension that your specific audience will recognize and trust. Do a quick check. Are there well-known, reputable sites using this extension in your space? It's a good sign. Question 3, is it available? This sounds obvious, but it's actually a genuine advantage of newer extensions. Because .com is so saturated, the name you might want is just simply gone. Newer TLDs like .co, .tech, or .store often have far more availability. You might be able to get a cleaner, shorter, more memorable name with an alternative extension than you could with .com. One more thing, because I get asked about this a lot. Will your choice of extension affect your SEO? The short answer is no, not directly. Google treats almost all TLDs equally in its ranking algorithm. The only exception is country code TLDs, something like .uk or .ca, which can signal to Google that you're targeting a specific country, which can help with local search results. What a domain extension actually affects is trust and memorability. And both of those things have real downstream effects on how people interact with your site, which in turn affects how it performs. Choose an extension that your audience recognizes and trusts, and your SEO will benefit from the engagement that it creates. Here's the thing I want you to walk away with. 10 years ago, a domain was just an address, a way to find a website. That's it. Today, a domain extension is part of your brand identity. It signals your purpose, your industry, your audience before anyone has read a single word of your content. The classics still hold real power. .com for general credibility, .net for tech-leaning businesses, .org for organizations doing work that goes beyond profit. Then you've got the new generation, .co for modern startups, .ai for tech innovation, .tech for anything in the technology space, .store for e-commerce. And if none of those fit perfectly, remember, there are 1,600 TLDs out there to choose from. Something will fit your business. The framework is simple: industry fit, trustworthiness, and availability. If you're ready to search for your domain, head to hosting.com/domains. You can check availability, compare pricing, and register in just a few minutes. And as always, if you want to go deeper on any of this, the links to the full articles are in the description. Thanks for watching Hosting.com Labs. I'll see you in the next one.